Hey Ecofictologists, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lovis and I am very excited today to be doing a book review on SkyDance by John D. Burns. The title subscript is SkyDance, The Fight for the Wild in the Scottish Highlands. Now, I live in Scotland, I live very close to the Highlands. This was something that drew me to the book in the first place. And I know from being around the Highlands and from being around colleagues at the university that there's a lot of controversy about land management and especially human-wildlife conflicts here. When people think of Scotland, they usually think of wild and wilderness and beautiful coastlines, and it is that. It's an absolutely beautiful country. But what a lot of people don't know is that most of the Scottish landscape is highly managed, either for forestry, for farming, or for hunting. Yes, it's very green, but most of the woodland is not ancient woodland. It was planted in order to be cut down for forestry. Something else I didn't know before moving here is that one of the biggest and most lucrative industries in Scotland is grouse shooting. Grouse is a game bird that apparently lots of people love to shoot. So huge swaths of the Highlands are managed in order to keep healthy populations of these birds alive so people can come and pay to shoot them. I think roughly 20% of the Highlands is dedicated to this practice, which involves burning the heather so the grouse can't hide as well, but also, and most importantly, the managing of the predators of the grouse. Unfortunately, those predators include some protected bird species like the hen harrier, whose populations are dwindling as a direct effect of shooting and poisoning to protect the grouse. I have colleagues who have been trying for years to try and negotiate communication between the landowners and managers of the estates and environmentalists and animal protection agencies such as the RSPB to try and keep the harriers off of the grouse moors without killing them, which is something that requires cooperation from both sides. So far, a lot has been tried and not a lot has been achieved, unfortunately, so the conflict goes on. This is the very conflict that is central to SkyDance. The title is an homage to the dance-like flight of the hen harrier as it soars across the Highlands. There is so much to talk about in this book, so let's just get right into it. As always, first up is a spoiler-free summary. SkyDance features a number of different character perspectives on all sides of this human-wildlife conflict. We have some hill walkers who love to hike and climb their way through the Highlands, enjoying the wilderness and the remoteness. They stay in bothies, which are communal primitive huts or cottages in the hills where you have a dry place to sleep and light a fire. We have some landowners who don't care very much for the natural beauty of the land, but instead want to uphold old hunting traditions and just want to get the most money out of the land as possible. We have the managers of those estates who need to make a living. Some care for the land and some care more for the money. And then we even have some chapters that are told from the perspective of the wildlife itself. All these characters mingle together as they each fight their corner to get or prevent approval for reintroducing the lynx, which is a wildcat, to the Scottish Highlands, from which it has been extinct for the last 1300 years. Now, the way I've just described those perspectives makes it sound like this book puts forth the intricacies of this dilemma, portraying each side's justified opinions, and really making the reader think about who is right and who is wrong. That is not the case. It is crystal clear which side the author supports. His portrayal of the landowners could not be more damning. He gives them no redeeming feature whatsoever. It is absolutely hilarious to read. There were so many times that I literally lolled. Because of the cartoonish villains that he has made them out to be. Well, it's hilarious for me because I'm more on the side of the hill walkers in this case. Probably not so hilarious for any landowners who might be reading this book. They might be a little peeved. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. But he does also point the finger at hill walkers themselves, who often go out into the Highlands with a list in hand, wanting to tick off all the Munros they can cross and peaks they can climb. Many spend their whole lives in these hills, enjoying them and loving them, but not really educating themselves about them, and therefore not doing their part to protect them. The other thing with the way that John Burns writes all these different character perspectives is that he almost writes them from like an omniscient point of view, often switching between characters in a chapter or even within a scene. He does what's called head hopping, jumping into whichever character's perspective he wants to focus on, he wants the reader to focus on in that moment. I haven't read many examples of this kind of writing. I think it's really difficult to do and therefore uncommon because it's then difficult to get a sense of each character individually because you're not going very deep into their perspective. But I think Burns pulls it off, kind of switching between characters as you would in a film, catching glimpses of reactions of several characters within a scene. Not being restricted to only a couple deep points of view, he has the freedom to follow the trajectories of all of his characters and give the reader a really well-rounded idea of the situation and its many facets. What really makes this book feel authentically Scottish is that he has included a lot of the Scottish accent and some dialect into the dialogue. Phrases like dinna ken, which means I don't know, are things that make the characters in the dialogue come to life. And it's not only Scottish either, actually. There are characters from Yorkshire that use words like tha and thee. And here I will have to admit that I listened to the audiobook and instead of reading the physical book, so I had the benefit of a narrator who did all the accents without me having to figure them out. But I still think that this would translate brilliantly if you just read it yourself, because it's written into the dialogue. There's no other way to read this. And maybe it'll make you a bit sympathetic to the adjustment that I needed and the trouble I had when I moved to Scotland. Someone greets you with a phrase like, "fit like," and my response was, yes. On his blog, John Burns says that he wrote the book because he wanted to make ordinary people who love to walk in the hills aware that the nature that they love is under threat and that they have a say in the matter. He reminisces on how the hills looked when he first started to walk through them and how they look now. He even has a podcast episode dedicated to why he wrote this book, and he gives you a little excerpt of the book, so I won't go into it too much here when he can say it so much better. I'll leave a link for that below. And actually, I'll let him say it himself next week because I am welcoming John onto Ecofictology for an interview, which I'm very, very excited about. So be sure to pop by for that next week. I promise a good time if the humour in this book is any indication of his personality. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed my review of SkyDance, The Fight for the Wild in the Scottish Highlands by John D. Burns. I highly recommend this read. It's filled with humour, but still conveys a very important message. Let me know in the comments below if you've read this book or now want to read this book. And of course, as always, be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button and the bell so that you get notified every week on a Wednesday when I post new content. Happy Highland reading, Ecofictologists, and I'll see you next week.